we'll go into all this, came over here to the United States 290 years ago. And I'm pretty lucky that my family was able to document all the way along the path. So what I'm going to impart to you is the story of that 290 years, which includes all 250 years, including participation in the major events of the United States. And I've drawn some conclusions that I'll share with you. Hopefully you'll draw your own conclusions as well, because I think we come out stronger from the 250th than we were going into the 250th. Just a final note, I put up here a picture of the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge in 1776. You know, that was the first time that a Patriot force actually beat a British force. Battle of Moores Creek Bridge here in North Carolina, where Patriots from North Carolina unfortunately lined up against Loyalists from North Carolina and won the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge. It was almost simultaneous with the Battle of Lexington Green. And we know that Lexington Green, the Patriots lost, but here the Patriots won. As I said, my family came over here 290 years ago, so we've been here for this full journey, and I kind of subtitled this opportunity, that's what we came for, migration, that's how we got here, and resoluteness, resolve, that's how we stayed here, because of our resolve to stay in the country. And this is not just my family, though this discussion will be about my family. This is thousands of people, many of them in your families as well, who have had that same opportunity, sense of migration, and resolve as a result of what we were doing here that had never been done before. My family came over on the Friendship out of Ireland, landing in Philadelphia on October 16th, 1734. As I say, about 290 years ago. And they were moving out of the Ulster Plantation. So a quick note about the Ulster Plantation. We don't study that much, but it was in the period of King James rule that the British, in order to pacify Ireland, took Scotsmen and Englishmen, Scotland and Cornwall primarily, and moved them into Ireland in two plantation areas, the Belfast Plantation and the Ulster Plantation. And my family was moved into the Ulster Plantation. My fifth great-grandfather, Robert James Byus, was born in Cornwall. So people that came from, and there were thousands of people that came from these Ulster and Belfast plantations to this new world, thousands of families migrated, are what you would call Scots-Irish. Though my family was neither Scottish nor Irish. But we would have been lumped in there with the Scots-Irish and had lived in the Ulster Plantation for however many years, perhaps as many as a century, as much as a century, before migrating to the United States from the Ulster Plantation. My fifth great-grandfather, Robert James Byus, with his wife, his son, and 11 children, including my fourth great-grandfather, James, were on the Friendship. There were other members of his Byus family, brothers and sisters, and their families who made the migration with them. They settled in Chester Township, Pennsylvania, which is where my fifth great-grandfather died in 1745. 11 years after they had transitioned, were migrated to the United States. I want that term migration to be in our minds. Migration is change. Change, significant change. You're leaving everything you had known before behind you. And you're doing that for a number of reasons. This was not forced migration. This was voluntary migration. And they migrated because they needed greater economic opportunity. They saw it over the ocean. They needed opportunity for education and for the welfare of their families. And they saw it in this unsettled land. And they needed religious opportunity. My fifth great-grandfather and his family were Presbyterians. Scottish Presbyterians, Cornwallian Presbyterians, Presbyterians that were being persecuted by the Church of England as they looked to homogenize all of Great Britain into the Anglican religion. This is a land grant. Robert James's son, James Byus, my fourth great-grandfather, was granted 230 acres in a southern region, southwestern region of Virginia called Amherst, and moved his family in about 1740, so not long after they had migrated here, to Amherst, Virginia, to farm that 230 acres. Again, migration, voluntary migration, with opportunity at the end of the migration. They were yeoman farmers. They wanted to farm their own land. They didn't hire people to farm their land. They had no forced labor on their land. They wanted to farm their own land, and they wanted to have land that they could farm with the parents, the children, the grandchildren farming the same piece of land. They were in that area through the Civil War period and served in the forces of the Marquis de Lafayette, which we're all familiar with down here. Interesting that I'm living in Fayetteville, having been a descendant of forces that fought with the Marquis de Lafayette. So Battle of Kings Bridge would have been battles that they were in. My third great-grandfather, Roland Byus, was born on that farm in 1767, and one of those that served with Major General Marquis de Lafayette. And his son, Roland, James's son Roland, third great-grandfather, with his 13 children, James had a dozen or so. And oh, by the way, this was generally with multiple wives. Not at the same time. But it kind of goes to the three facts of life that we tend to forget every once in a while. That getting a child is really easy. Birthing a child is very hard. And raising a child is near on impossible. But 13 children from 2 or 3 wives sequentially. There was no tendency in the colonies to do as the Israelites had done, where brothers would marry wives when the husbands died. So this was generally just multiple wives to one man. His 13 children, including my second great-grandfather, Ben, moved to the Ohio River corridor to farm that area in Cable County, West Virginia. So my branch of the family goes north and west. Other the branches of the family tended to go south and west. There's maybe some significance to that availability of land, but what it meant was then, in the period of my great-grandfather, Buck Byus, William, that meant that my family line was on the Union side. Buck had joined what was the 8th Virginia Cavalry until West Virginia was separated from Virginia at the beginning of the Civil War and became West by God, Virginia. And then that unit became the 7th West Virginia Infantry He served for the entire war in the forces in the Shenandoah for General Popes and Sheridan. After the Civil War, he went back to West Virginia, married, and then proceeded to get an ox team and go to Montana. He migrated to Montana for several years to pan for gold in the gold rush of Montana, got some money, came back, bought a farm, and settled again in Cable County, West Virginia. So for him, the migration was not so physical as it was a migration of careers. Because even though he had a farm, he was drawn into and became a minister in the Methodist Church and served for 50 years as a Methodist minister in West Virginia. It's part of what reminds me that we have always been members of the church. We have always been Reformed Protestants through all those generations. And as a reminder for the young people in the crowd, that even though I'm still a young 72, the Civil War of the United States was still dinner talk when I was a kid. With a dad that came from the North and a mother whose family was strongly Confederate tendency in Arkansas. We were still reliving and refighting the Civil War at the dinner table every night when I was a child. It was still in our living memory, and how impressive the Civil War was for us, and that our country made it through that is because people on both sides decided to put their differences aside and focus on migration, opportunity, and resoluteness. My grandfather, William's oldest son of 11 children, decided that neither farming nor the ministry was for him, so he went and worked in the steel mills and the tin mills of that great rust belt between Chicago and Pittsburgh, became an expert in tin plating, and was called to be the superintendent of the tin plate mill in Elwood, Indiana. At one time, that tin plate mill, which was opened by William McKinley in 1896, and sat atop this great dome of natural gas, which was Indiana Resources, was the largest tin plate mill in the world, sitting there 39 miles north of Indianapolis, on land that you could take a pipe literally in your hand and stick it into the ground, and natural gas would come out to power the plant. By 1916, as my grandfather took over as superintendent, the natural gas was starting to peter out, so he had to bring in new methods of fueling this world's largest tin plate plant. And so the railroads built up significantly in that Elwood, Indianapolis corridor, just to bring the fuel necessary for the tin plate. Industry was the new frontier for my grandfather's generation and his children. How do we keep that resolve and migrate into that industry? So his sons followed in his footsteps, kind of, not everyone. Byus, second child, was an expert in tin plating, holds patents in tin plating, was headhunted by the United States Steel Corporation to go up and open and run their Canadian tin plating plant in Ojibwa, Canada. Byus, third son, exported tin plating capability to Birmingham, Alabama, as the steel mills and tin mills of that Pittsburgh of the South were reopening finally after the Civil War. Carl Byus decided he wanted to stay in that corridor, but he was interested in photography, so he owned a printing company in Cleveland, Ohio. Entrepreneurship. My Uncle Dean went to work for a new company, moved his family to California, continued that physical migration and that job migration as a factory manager for Union Carbide. Worked heavily in Union Carbide's necessary defense industry during World War II. And my dad, the youngest of the 5 boys, second youngest of the 6 children, joined the Army. He was at that age, 18 in 1930, where his college career was curtailed by the Depression. And so he joined the Army instead. Enlisted as a private, served in combat in World War II and in Korea, retired as a lieutenant colonel in my hometown, El Paso, Texas, in 1961, and went from there into education and taught middle school education after he was able to complete his college degree. Middle school education, 7th and 8th grade math and history for the rest of his life. And my aunt, Cora, went to school, became a registered nurse, and selflessly dedicated herself to the medical profession for the rest of her life in Elwood, Indiana. Now my dad, the youngest of the 5 kids, college career curtailed, not really drawn into the metal trades of steel and tin, established a legacy in the middle 20th century for my family of the military. He and I and my brothers followed that pipeline of opportunity. Physical migration only as much as the Army and the Navy required of us, but job opportunity through the mid-20th century into the end of the 20th century. Interesting thing about my dad that I love hearing about was that he was with MacArthur when Corregidor fell and left behind. But he was left behind to go into the hills and join with the Filipino guerrilla forces in preparation for MacArthur's inevitable return. So he spent the World War II in the hills of the Philippines with McSaysay and the forces of the Philippine guerrillas. He rests with my mom at Fort Bliss National Cemetery in El Paso. I recently had a chance to go back there. So, Cold War defense. We migrated for opportunity in farming. We migrated again for opportunity in industry. We migrated again for opportunity into the military during the period of the Cold War. And this is me. When I graduated from the Naval Academy in '76, I was a Marine engineer. That metal trade was not far behind me. If you know what a Marine engineer is, we take care of making sure all the pipes run where they're supposed to run, and all the pumps are working when they're supposed to work, on board ships in particular. I was commanding officer of USS Tautog, one of our fast attack nuclear submarines from that 60s and 70s era, SSN 639. I had the pleasure of being the commander of Submarine Squadron 7. My submarine squadron was all brand new 6088s at the time. Many of them are out of service now. I was the director of operations of the Pacific Fleet. That's 70% of the U.S. Navy at the time, combat ships on 9/11, and took that fleet to war after that terrible tragedy. I moved from there to be 7th Fleet Chief of Staff, made flag while I was 7th Fleet Chief of Staff in Yokosuka, Japan. Commander of Naval Forces in Korea, armistice forces preparing for what we always consider to be an inevitable northern attack on South Korea. Retired as oceanographer of the Navy, here in Washington, D.C., stayed in Washington, D.C., working for a research and development company out of Columbus, Ohio called Battelle, and left Battelle, become an adjunct professor of ethics and engineering management at the Catholic University, and now I consider myself a gentleman farmer. All I farm is ducks and chickens, and anything in the ground, the soil's bad. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Kathy's my wife. We have 4 kids. We have 8 grandkids, and we're not quite sure, but we're pretty close to being done on that grandkid part. I don't have enough grandkids to even populate a family in my great-grandfather's days. This is what my dad's kids did. My brother John, who has passed, was a retired Master Chief Petty Officer in the United States Navy Reserve. My brother Kent is currently an advisor to the governor of Texas for Gulf Coast recovery and professor of finance at Texas A&M University. My sister Tina is a retired middle school educator in El Paso. And you know what you know about me. I really enjoy teaching ethics, by the way, and I hope to continue to do that. So what drove my family? Well, my family drove me. There's no question in my mind. It wasn't something that they talked about. It wasn't something that was held up to me and said, you have to do at least this much. But the story was always there. It was always something that we shared and talked about. And I think that's a great idea. To know your family history and to talk your family history is part, I think, of raising the family to proceed forward. We were always knowledge-oriented, from farming to heavy machinery to military service to education. I think that my family's drive for me was to stay ahead of the power curve on knowledge and education. To be strong in your faith. And I'll repeat this again, but we have always been members of churches. We have always been part of the community of believers, whether Methodist or Presbyterian. So I guess I'm probably more Arminian than I am Calvinist, and there are some in my family who are more Calvinist than they are Arminian. But we both stayed in that Reformed tradition. And strong in duty. Clearing frontiers, farming, directing steel yards, instructing classrooms. You could see it in my family, and I hope people will be able to say they saw it in me. The duty, we have a duty to be trustworthy. We have a duty to build. We have a duty to serve others, and we have a duty to care. Simply to care. And I find it refreshing to be with people who have that same shared sense of duty in their lives. My family, I would say, has always honored its past, but we've never made mythologies about it. Those ancestors of mine, from Robert James coming off of the Friendship, were not perfect people. They carried the same problems with them that everybody else carried. They were one of thousands of people. There are thousands, tens of thousands of families exactly like this around us every day. Some of them much more recent to the United States than my family has been for 290 years. So no mythologizing. Finally, my daughter, who's a little bit more knowledgeable about this than I am, has pointed out to me, and he says, you know, there's a certain type of person that embraces change. Not everyone embraces change. And when you look at this family history, you see a group of people who were willing to embrace change. In fact, they looked forward to change. They grabbed a hold of it. They were never afraid of it. I think the reason was because they saw in change opportunity, and they wanted to see it, seize it, and make the best of it. It's what I call virtuous ambition. So many times when you talk to young people, they look at you and believe that ambition is a 4-letter word. Well, virtuous ambition is how we help each other, how we fulfill our duty. And finally, a foundation of hope and confidence. My faith is the foundation of hope and confidence that was taught to me by watching people who have the same foundation of hope and confidence in their lives. And as we celebrate the 250th, I just want all of us, whether we've been here for 290 years or here for 25 years, to say that what really makes this country great is its spirit of embracing change, seizing opportunity, and having a foundation of hope and confidence that is resolute and resolved in our lives. With that, that's my story. I'm sticking to it.